Hey everyone, welcome back to Valley Chat. Pastor John Karolus here with Pastor Scott Seidler, and we are continuing in our capital campaign. We're continuing in this super exciting season of ministry here at Shepherd, and today we're talking about what it means to leave a legacy for that next generation. Pastor Scott, how are you doing today, and how are you looking ahead to the next sermon in this series?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to continuing the conversation, especially here on our Shea campus, where at least in some ways we tend a little bit older adults here on our Shea campus than the Mountain View campus. And I know this conversation around leaving a legacy and what is the kind of world we're leaving behind is a big topic of conversation. So, that's going to be really my kind of hook is what kind of world are we leaving behind? And in given our United States political context and certainly family pressures with grandchildren and even in some cases great grandchildren, that is a big, big answer to search for and deliver. What about
Yeah,
you?
I definitely hear that conversation with people near in retirement, people in retirement. How do I know that what I'm doing with either my resources or with my time right now is the best that I can do for setting up my family or those that come after me for success? But I also hear it a lot in conversations I have with young families, parents of young children, parents of our preschoolers, who desire nothing more than to set their little kids up for the best kind of life possible. Um, Bringing them to Shepherd Preschool is a part of that desire, but then selecting the right kindergarten, selecting the right elementary school, middle school, high school, leading them to help pick the right college. Are they leaving a legacy? Are they building a legacy that's going to lead to the success of the generations that come after them, the health of the generations that come after them? So I think our entire worshiping population is thinking about this big question, and so we've got an opportunity to really speak into the hearts of the people that are a part of our family.
Yeah.
This weekend, we're looking at the idea of leaving a legacy, particularly through the lens of the scriptures. And the Bible talks a lot about legacy, about generations, about sharing the faith with those that come after us, and remaining faithful to the covenant God has made with his people. And this week we're looking at Psalm 78, which is a pretty long psalm, but we're just looking at the first 7 verses in worship, which have to do with uh, telling the laws of God to the people that come after you and remaining faithful to his instructions and his commands. As you think about scriptures that inspire you kind of in this thread, leaving a legacy, being a good father or being a good grandfather or just a good leader, do any kind of particularly jump to mind that resonate with you? And how might they kind of influence the way you look at Psalm 78 in particular?
Yeah, if you've known me long enough, you know that my favorite passage of the Bible is Lamentations 3:19-21. His mercies are new every morning. And so when I think of legacy, I can think of, like a long-term picture and having a lot of manufactured qualities of life that, kind of persist into the future. Um, I I am a moment by moment kind of guy. And so my question is, what's the best thing I can do at this moment with what I've got today to leave a legacy, knowing that the mercies that God gave me at the beginning of the day are sufficient to leave the best kind of legacy from this day. So that for me is always going to be kind of my heart song. Not to get too wrapped up in macro, kind of concerns or big picture items, but just to know that whatever is in front of my nose on a particular day in a particular moment, if I am found faithful in that moment or circumstance, I am doing the most important thing I can in order to leave the legacy that God wants me to leave, because I don't know whether I get tomorrow. I don't know whether I get this afternoon, frankly. So I am that kind of moment by moment guy. I know that when, we as a congregation talk about leaving a legacy, we're an organization. We need to think a little bit more broadly in terms of like, where are we going over the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, that kind of thing. I get that. But as for me personally, how will I live? I live a very moment by moment kind of experience. What about you?
I think that picture is super helpful because we imagine leaving a legacy as something that that is initiated by our death, kind of to speak just morbidly about it. Like we
Sure.
that's kind of where we draw the line. Oh, the legacy I'm leaving is whatever people think of me after I die. But
Right.
if we think about it more in kind of how we think about our reputation and how the choices we make and the words we say and the attitudes that we embrace, those all shape the legacy around us, kind of in real time. And so
Yeah.
everything that we're doing is contributing to the legacy that we will eventually leave someday when we leave this life, but we're also kind of leading ourselves to that legacy and leading those around us in the same way. And so
Right.
I love the perspective also about kind of the immediacy with which we have to live life rather than trying to live 4 or 5 days ahead of time. You can only go one day at a time. So that's a phrase that I'll say a lot if I'm walking with somebody through grief, walking with
Yeah.
somebody through challenging life circumstances or something that they're wrestling with,
For
hey,
sure.
we can only take one day at a time. Let's not try to go any faster than that. And even then, you can only go one breath at a time. If you really need to slow it down, so let's just take a breath, and think about that. And as we get that, kind of granular about the way we live and the way we interact with others and the way we encounter God's word, I think that starts to have an impact then on those sort of secondary and tertiary kind of connections people make with us. And so the encouragement really is don't get lost in thinking about this future that you won't see because you can engage so fruitfully with the present that you're seeing right now.
Right.
So that's definitely something on my mind when it comes to thinking about a legacy and the kind of story I want to tell with my life, for sure. Uh, as we encounter Psalm 78, I find it to be a fascinating text. And so if people aren't familiar with it, look it up and take a look at it because it's a long psalm. I mean, I think there's 40 or 50 verses, and uh, the first seven are what we are looking at, which give that general instruction of we want to reveal the hidden lessons from the past, which would be the truth of God's faithfulness, the confusion about our own unfaithfulness in the past, the unfaithfulness of our ancestors. But we're not going to hide those realities. We want to tell the future generations about them because God gave us His good word. He established His laws and His covenant with us, and we want to continue in that tradition, trusting not in our obedience but actually in God's goodness, which is proven again and again by looking back at the past. So then at verse 8, you get this powerful line. Then they will not be like their ancestors, stubborn, rebellious, unfaithful, refusing to give their hearts to God. And after that, the writer of the psalm, one of the sons of Asaph, just goes into detail about how at various chapters of God's people in the past, they worshiped idols. They rejected God's law. They pursued their own desires. When you kind of couch the instruction to witness to witness to future generations God's goodness, what kind of tone, what kind of freedom actually does it unlock for you by setting it in the context of it's not how it went in the past, but we have the opportunity of the future to live differently. How do those, that juxtaposition, how does that kind of hit you?
Yeah. I think there's, again, I'll say it this way, there's the macro past, which is like our ancestors have lived this way. And then there's the micro past, which is how have I lived? And the great thing about being Lutheran is the recognition that I by nature am sinful and unclean. There's corruption at work in me. And so every day of my past is a testimony to some kind of micro deficiency in my trust, in my capacity or or sustainability in following God. There's always an opportunity to improve on that. And so for me, the kind of landing zone for Psalm 78 is verse 7. Then they will put their trust in God and will not forget his deeds, but will keep his commands. And that's really the goal, is to continually increase in our trust in God. Is the legacy I'm leaving with my kids, my grandkids, my friends and neighbors, is it increasing their trust in God? Even if that trust in God may not be, fully focused on Christ, it may not be fully understanding the forgiveness of sins that Christ won for us on the cross, even if it's just a general knowledge of God, am I on balance increasing the awareness of God and his activity in each of our individual lives by the way I'm living my life. That's what, again, on balance, I want to do. I want to be a light for not only the particular knowledge of God in Christ, but also the general knowledge of God that He exists, which, by the way, the Apostle Paul was big on. He made the distinction between leaving a legacy that increased the general awareness and trust in God, reverence for Him, like on Mars Hill when he was in Athens, this statue to the unknown God. I could tell you specifically about him, but hey, at least you're there. Let's honor him. And now let's baptize that with the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. So I want to be that leavening agent, kind of like yeast for bread. I want to be that leavening agent wherever I go. Um, that for me is where Psalm 78 really gets into my specific kind of legacy leaving.
I think too, what specifically our tradition has to offer by way of reconciling my imperfect past with my calling to be perfect is that in remembering our baptism each day, right? Luther writes, when we wake up in the morning, we should put to death the old Adam, embrace the life that was given to us in our baptism when we were washed clean of all our sin, adopted into the family of God, given
Right.
the gift of the freedom to live a new life.
Yeah.
We can still, with honesty, humility, courage, look into the past, look at yesterday, and we don't hide away from that. We don't try to sweep our mistakes under the rug. We don't even become obsessed with making right all of our wrongs. As far as we're able to do that, we should, but we don't put our confidence of our position as a recipient of God's grace on how well we make right what's been done wrong. How
Right.
how much better we're getting over the course of time either. Because if we start to just find our certainty on our own track record, we become self-obsessed and we start to constantly be looking in the past and in the mirror to figure out if I am somebody who is displaying enough of God's love to warrant my inclusion into his family for eternity. That tends to be kind of the sentiment that I run into, whether it be in online kind of influencer preaching or just in conversations with Christians who are intent on wanting to be confident of their faith and their salvation and the spirit within them. And so we have this opportunity to share God's good news with them. And it's expressed so beautifully in Psalm 78. No, there are problems with me. There are problems with my past. I do make mistakes. I do wander off track. And it's not because I don't do that anymore that I know I'm better. It's because God's goodness has persisted even through those seasons of wandering, those seasons of doubt, those seasons of disobedience. And so I can wake up in the morning, I can embrace the promises God has given me through my baptism, and then in freedom look at the day ahead rather than in complete fear, wondering if my position as God's son is under threat because of my imperfection. We should never
Right.
grow complacent, but it should be freedom and enthusiasm that pushes us toward that new life rather than this fear and just this pressure of our own self-evaluation being the lion, for making it in.
Jen, you've been talking lately about just kind of your reading and love for Desert Fathers, mystics, those who maybe live a very reflective life. Talk a little bit about what you kind of are thinking about when you think about those kind of reflective lives and the legacy that comes behind them.
Yeah, yeah. I find a lot of personal encouragement for my spiritual walk from these kinds of thinkers, from these kinds of leaders, from these kinds of writers who had committed, you typically, hundreds of years ago, committed to this way of life that was different than the rest of the world. And in that kind of way of life, where they have gathered together into a community that is committed to uh, supporting one another 24/7 in pursuit of obeying God's commands, singing his praises, living in his word, prayer, caring for their neighbors. They develop insights that
Right.
speak really beautifully into my lived experience of, okay, the world is full of people. No two people see it the same way. I can trust God with that difference and simply try to embrace them as someone who he also loves rather than as a project I need to accomplish their transformation of through my effort or through my word.
Right.
Um, what I find in those resources, whether it be desert fathers or church fathers, or even just visitation with our members who have lived rich lives of faith, what I find is this profound sense of peace despite all of the unknown, all the uncertainty, all of the stress, all of the conflict in the world. And their lives often are not void of that. If anything, there seems to be a great deal of that kind of upheaval around them, and yet they find this peace that it's God who's doing the work. They simply have the opportunity to be a part of his communication of that love and truth into the lives of people they're connected with. Now, an interesting thing is, okay, these guys went and, these church fathers, for example, they go and live in a monastery away from any city by themselves. And you could easily say, like, I just kind of dismiss their insight because they're not living real life. They've chosen that they don't have to deal with the things we have to deal with by being people engaged in a society that incorporates
Right.
many different kinds of views and perspectives. But what I find is that they're very quick to admit how sinful they are and how they don't see themselves as living in this cloister that's above the rest of the world. It just is set up in a way where they can engage with things a little more directly. But then that language actually speaks into all the kind of craziness that we encounter in our lives. So that's sort of really where I draw a lot of inspiration from them on it. As you encounter kind of these ideas, but also you're living a real life of a leader of an organization, a leader and manager of staff, a family, father, and soon to be grandfather. Your kids are now into adulthood and living out there in the world. What is kind of all that complexity for you? How is that either clarified or spoken into through passages like this?
Yeah. Again, I'm a simple guy. I'm just a country farmer, John. And that is complex. Life is complex. And we were talking just last night, you and I about the just so many different factors and inputs that come into our system throughout the day and trying to reconcile all of them. So I'm just a very simple guy. And, right now I'm having this conversation. My three kids are somewhere. My wife is at home, hopefully getting over a touch of the flu. And when I'm home with her tonight, I'm going to be all in on Renee. And when I go and see my new grandpup that Abby and Brennan have got, I'm going to be all in on them. And if Connor calls me from college and he wants to have a conversation unexpectedly this afternoon, my prayer is always that I'll be always in this position of responsive, healthy reactivity to the opportunities, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is in you, always ready for the opportunities that are going to be presented to you. So, the older I've gotten, the more complex life has gotten with organizational commitments and staff and everything else. But at the end of the day, I am but a human being with a body and a mind that only has a limited, finite set of resources, attention, ability to stay awake, that kind of thing. And I only have 24 hours, just like you do, just like anybody else. And so either I choose to try to exceed that humanity which God has given to each and every one of us equally, or and that's not healthy, or I try to live comfortably within it. And, I'm not the savior of the world. I'm not Jesus. You're not Jesus. Even though a bunch of preschoolers think you're pretty close to Jesus. And then, of course, we work with Pastor Allen, who is really Jesus, you know. So we're not the Messiah. We can only do what we can do in the time and the opportunity with the opportunity that's presented. So I really just try to keep into, my own, not just my own lane, but keep within the capacity that I have in the moment. Um, and if I can do that, I'll let God figure out what the legacy is. It's kind of like, as a president of the United States will get ready to come to the end of his term, reporters will ask him, well, what do you think your legacy is? And I remember, I don't know whether it was Obama or who it was, but, I will let the historians figure out what my legacy is. My job right now is to do the job. And so that's what I want to do. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the job with the highest level of prudence, ethic, legality, of course, competency, and then I'll let everything else just kind of go from there. Um, I think we get so lost in, am I living a life of significance? Am I living a life of value? All those things are great questions to ask every once in a while, but I'm just asking the question, okay, it's 12:24 on November 4th. Am I doing right by this opportunity? Because I don't know if I get to 1 o'clock. Don't mean to be morose, but you just don't know. So that's kind of my lane that I live in.
Yeah,
Your thoughts?
there's a beauty in, considering, am I living well? Am I living a valuable life? Am I living an impactful life? Am I making the most of my life? But you can become so caught up in that you forget to be living, in the meantime. And so the living is an important part of leaving the legacy, because the legacy is the life that you lived. Um, when we think about how this connects into the project that our church is embarking on, this next generation capital campaign, and though there's a very practical and very tangible, like, purpose to that campaign, we are renovating a campus and a building that is in need of repair and in need of improvement. It still, I think, gives us an opportunity to to use our our resources, our finances, um, to contribute to something that's larger than ourselves,
Right.
and in so doing, be reminded of and encouraged to be thinking about that kind of investment through the way that we encounter our family members, encounter our church members, encounter those unexpected phone calls that come in, and even just encounter the day in front of us. Are we doing this in a way that isn't so caught up in myself that God's able to use it uh, for His purposes, rather than me trying to wrestle it down and use it for my own? And that gives me encouragement. That gets me excited about sharing what kind of opportunity is to be engaged with this capital campaign. Do you have any kind of thoughts, connecting thoughts on sort of the conversation and the building?
Yeah, whenever you have a capital campaign that is going to be about building or renovating or expanding or anything like that, obviously you're talking about bricks and mortar, but you've got to ask the question, what that brick and mortar contains and serves. Do I believe in that? And so, what are the criteria? It can be, do I believe in the ministry that pastors, John and Scott and Pastor Allen and the ministry staff, our preschool, do we believe in the values and the content of ministry that's being presented? And specifically, for us here at Shepherd, we are not a political church. We are not, having a culture war every time someone comes into church on a Sunday. We're here because we realize that people need Jesus. Individual people need Jesus. And you can blast away from the pulpit and you can touch some of the individuals in the room, but you're likely not able to touch all of them in the room. And that's why our ministry posture is very personalized. It is very focused on, what I call customized discipleship. You can call it Starbucks Christianity if you want, triple shot, double whip, venti, hot, whatever it is. Um, but it's this idea that everybody deserves to be considered a lost sheep, the one that Jesus leaves the flock, the 99 to go and find. And I think that's a huge value here at Shepherd. We are a church that values the one over the many, or at least as much as the many. So that would be the first thing, is that this is these buildings house a very personalized concern for each human being that entrusts the care of their souls to us. The second piece of the puzzle is we're a Lutheran church. That we have a very distinctive theology. And that theology is first and foremost broken in the sight of God because of our sin, but confident in the sight of God that there is no other way than that which God has provided, the gospel of Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. We are not a church of works righteousness. We are not a church of civil righteousness or civil impact. We are a church that is fundamentally spiritual in our orientation. And so when we think about leaving a legacy with our buildings, we're not just leaving a legacy with buildings for the sake of brick and mortar. It's in order to preserve a Lutheran witness in this community that I think in American Christianity today is absolutely essential. It is a very, very individualized spiritual focus. So, as we're thinking and asking people to step into a capital campaign and make a financial commitment so that 45 years from now, after 45 years of being here, this church will still be contending for the sake of the gospel, I hope it's with this value that what we are working to leave behind is a Lutheran congregation where each individual sheep can be served and ministered to, encouraged and inspired to themselves, leave a legacy, pass on that value to their kids, their grandkids, their friends and neighbors. That's my hope at least, and that's what I'm really doing my, hardest to pass on. What about
Yeah,
you, John?
I think it just captures the the truth that no one is beyond God's ability to connect with. And though our congregation is set up to particularly connect with specific people just because of where we are and the style we have and the makeup of our population, um, we are always called to be keeping an eye out and an open door for the one who's seeking God or just seeking something, some kind of anchor, some kind of foothold, some kind of solid ground. And what they'll find, our prayer and our intention is that what they'll find here is a community that's centered on that truth, that it's not my goodness that I am confident in. It's God's goodness. It's his
Yep,
persistence. It's his consistency, even in the face of my issues and my problems. And I can be honest about all of those, because he is the one that's carrying me through. And then my opportunity then is to share with you or with whoever it is that God's brought us into contact with that the same thing is true for you, through
right.
the work of his spirit. So, um,
Love it.
yeah, I'm excited about talking about legacy this weekend. I'll be over at Shea. You'll be at Mountain View. It's going to be fun. And in the meantime, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, um, any of the listeners or people viewing this podcast, if you want to just sit down and chat through what the story of your life is that you're telling or the legacy you'd like to leave, we'd love to have that conversation with you. We'd
Right.
appreciate the opportunity just to explore God's work and will in your life and to provide you support and encouragement. So don't hesitate to send us an email, go to our website, get involved and get connected with us, and we'll get connected. But until next time, God bless you and keep you, and we'll look forward to our next
Absolutely.
conversation around the next generation.